Nice to see everybody.
It is.
Hello, everyone.
You're in under my name?
Everybody, welcome. We're going to let folks continue to enter the room. Thank you for joining us here. We'll get started in a moment. You'll see Jeremy, he's mission control tonight, so he's letting folks in the room. So we'll just start in a few minutes. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see everybody's face. It's not a school hallway, but it is nice to see you. Folks that are just entering, we're going to get started in a moment. We're just waiting for everybody to get entered into the room. Great. Getting notes. We are all here. Great. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Amy, I'm going to get started if that works for you.
Please do.
Great. Okay. My name is Jay Rosenthal. Welcome tonight. I am the immediate past president of the board, along with Dan Stern, who's also on the call. I'm also the chair of the pandemic task force of the board of directors. I want to give an overview of sort of what we'll be going through tonight, a sense of the agenda, a sense of the timing, and a sense of what you will hear tonight. So first, obviously, I'll provide a welcome and introduction and an overview. After that, Amy will provide a timeline of how we got to today, sort of a look back on the sort of steps and moments that brought us to mid-May. Then she will switch to insights from the parent survey that has been out or was out within the past week. Then we'll get to a Q&A, which I will facilitate with Amy and with Karen Rosen, who's the chair of the board, also on the Zoom right now, and Dan Stern, where appropriate. That Q&A came in from the RSVP, so we have a good set of questions which we'll talk about. And if there are other questions that come up, please feel free to send them to me in chat. The chat will go directly to me, so send that to me if you have questions midway through or during the question period. And then we will conclude. In an ideal world, we will conclude around 9:15 to both respect your time, respect our time, and respect our family time, which is kind of abundant right now, but it's still nice to be able to be out by 9:15, I think. So I want to also share sort of what tonight will be and what it won't be. So we will obviously share the results of the parent survey. We will share our best thinking to date and moving forward, and where we believe we are in the current state of affairs, what inputs, partners, stakeholders we are talking and listening to as days move on. What it will not be, and we'll talk about why, is necessarily a clear path forward, either in the immediate term, the near term, or the long term. And that is because there are things we just don't know, and information is coming every day. And this sort of brings me to this point that we are all, I think all of us on a personal, professional, family, school level are operating at a place we've never actually been before. We generally come to our lives, all of us, with some sense of knowing and ability to control things that are in our control. And that is not necessarily the case right now. From a board, from a pandemic planning committee, task force perspective, from a school perspective, from a board perspective, we are really talking about and thinking about multiple levels of scenario planning, which I know everybody's doing on a personal, professional, family level as well. Like you, we're getting information daily. Sometimes information comes fast and we are asked to quickly respond, and then it changes day to day, moment to moment. Just today, hours as we're preparing for this meeting, the province of Ontario said there will be notices or more comments about public schools coming out early next week, but not defining what early next week really is. And early next week is actually an extension from what we were going to hopefully know the end of this week. So things are changing momentarily. So I wanted to, with that context, I wanted to hand it over to Amy to go over a timeline and insights from the parent survey. And again, if there's questions that come up either during her presentation or during the Q&A, which we'll go to after Amy's talk, please feel free to send it to me in the chat function. Amy.
Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to be here with you, whatever that means. I'm delighted that so many of you have chosen to come out and hear what we're thinking right now. The work we've been doing with the pandemic task force, with the board, to get us to this point today and being able to share all of this information. What's really nice about tonight is that we have parents here, we have grandparents here, we have people who are interested partners and stakeholders, and truly a representation of our community. So what I'm going to share with you is a set of slides. I'm going to start with a timeline, and I'm going to jump into some survey data. And you'll see in the timeline that the survey was done about 2 weeks ago, and I'll talk a little bit about the context. And we've been doing a lot of individual check-ins. We're on what we call round 2. Every family should be receiving some outreach from a member of our administration. We're connecting with families that way. We know that families are giving feedback to teachers and administration is soliciting feedback. But we thought it was important that we really get some quantitative data from our whole school about what things felt like and how people were experiencing the learning. And the next step in this is doing a little bit of follow-up to dig deeper into an area that we think needs some more answers to some questions. And so we'll be striking a small focus group, again, using a third-party focus group facilitator, just like we did in the survey, we used a third-party provider. And that will be happening in the next 2 weeks. And so once we have some more information from the focus group, we'll find the right way to share that and the right way that we can put what we learn into action. So I'm going to share my screen and go through a timeline of the last, I guess, 9 weeks with you and show you some of the results from our survey. I can't share my screen, Jeremy. Can you fix that? Okay, no problem. Okay, so what I've prepared here is a timeline. Sorry, a timeline of what has happened. In mid-February, early March, we began thinking about pandemic preparedness, and we formulated a proper pandemic preparedness plan. We used a template that had been given to us through our case community, and we started to customize that to make sense for our school in our location. You know, in Toronto, in the JCC, we were speaking to Harriet and Roz at the JCC, to Julie, who is essentially the facilities manager at the JCC, and thinking about what it is that we needed to do to be prepared in the event that, in fact, there was going to be a pandemic. And so, you know, we worked with the task force, we worked with the board, we worked with our community partners at UJA, at the JCC. The network of Jewish day schools in Toronto started a very regular stream of communication to ensure that what we were doing was putting us in step with each other. We were able to use our Prisma network, which is the North American Jewish day school network, and learn from schools mostly in the New York area who were a few weeks ahead of where we found ourselves. And CASE, our independent school network, provided us resources and other schools to converse with. And Dr. Joshua Tepper availed himself as a consultant to us, and he was giving us medical thoughts and some medical advice as we sort of walked down this path. On March 13th, we had our final day of school in the JCC. On March 12th, the Toronto Jewish Day Schools had met and put some regulations and practices in place for what we thought was going to be another week or two that we thought we'd be able to stay in school. But on the afternoon of the 12th, the Premier and Minister Lecce called school off for the 2 weeks after March break in the public system in Ontario, and we quickly followed suit. On March 17th, with the weekend and 2 days to prepare, and tremendous lift by our whole faculty, led by our administration and our tech expert, Jeremy, we launched our digital learning environment. And we were blown away by the response from students and families, how seamlessly our kids were able to transition. And if I was to go back a few years, I think that a piece of what has allowed this to be so successful is the technology program, the technology infrastructure that was put in place with funds from the 2016 High Gala. On March 18th and 31st, we had really successful question and answer periods with Joshua Tepper, and we got a sense that our greater community really wanted to connect with us. We were having challah bakes and havdalahs, different programs, and we have found that in addition to school, there's been a tremendous amount of community engagement through our digital environment. On April 20th, we returned from Passover break, and we had some schedule tweaks. We made mostly changes in the schedule for the younger kids, and the big difference was that every student was given a one-on-one session with at least one, if not 2 or 3 teachers weekly. And so we have found that the feedback from students and teachers and parents has been that those one-on-one sessions are really allowing kids to feel connected and move forward in their learning. And then on April 28th, we shared the parent survey. We made the choice to use a provider that CASE had shared with us, and his name's Kevin Graham, and Kevin offered this service to our school as well as any other CASE school in Canada who wanted to participate in the survey. His whole business is independent school surveys, and he found that after 30 years in the industry, he wanted to do something to give back, and so he offered school these 8 questions, and we chose to give it a try and see what would happen. And what's been so nice about using Kevin as a provider and this survey is that we've had a comparative base, and I'll be able to share with you how our school looks on the numbers against the other schools in Canada who participated. On April 2nd and 29th, I think Cheryl was at both of them, I was at both of them, and Karen was at both of them. The Kashitsky Center at UJA brought Eric Rohr, who is the educational law group lead at BLG and really the educational law sort of guru in Ontario, to do some seminars for the heads of school group, the administrator group, and the chair of the board community of practice. And so those were incredibly informative sessions. And then that brings us to tonight, May 14th, when we've chosen to host a community meeting, primarily to share the data from the parent survey and also to answer questions that have emerged from the comments, that have emerged as thematic questions in our reach outs to families, and that came through the RSVP for the event. So on an ongoing basis, the Pandemic Task Force meets. It's a small subset of the board. We've been meeting weekly. Our board has been meeting either weekly or bi-weekly every other week. I meet on a very regular basis with CASE heads of schools. Those groups have been broken up either East Coast and West Coast, or upper school and elementary school, and Rena's been able to take part in some academic lead. Cheryl's been able to take part in some communities of practice through CASE. And I've been meeting regularly with the other heads of schools, both the whole group of heads and then those of us who are both Toronto Jewish Day School heads and CASE heads. And on occasion, we've been meeting with heads of school or development, advancement, institutional advancement professionals from American schools through different providers who have been creating social networks. So that's how we get to tonight. It's been a busy, busy few months. So I'm going to share with you the reports from the survey. There were 8 questions on the survey, and you know, my read, and Kevin, when I spoke to him, his read was that Paul Penna showed tremendous parent satisfaction on this survey. So the first question was, I trust the school's leadership to make decisions that first protect the health and safety of my child and our family. And our average score was a 4.6. And so as on a 5-point scale, what Kevin gave us was weighted scores. And the average score of Canadian independent schools that participated was a 4.5, with the highest score being a 4.7. So we felt like we were exactly where we would want to be, with great satisfaction, and also comparative to our colleague schools across Canada. The school has been proactive in keeping me informed as the COVID-19 crisis continues to unfold. Again, we had a really high satisfaction score here. Our weighted score was a 4.7, with the average being a 4.5 and the high score being a 4.7. So we were on par with the high score for recipient school participants. School officials have been readily available to answer my questions related to the school's response during this period of uncertainty. Our score was a 4.7. The average score was a 4.3, and the high score was a 4.7. So again, we were as high as schools were rating with respect to parent satisfaction in the space. I'm sorry. Can you move away? Sorry, I have, yeah, they're busy behind me. The school has demonstrated appropriate flexibility in response to a rapidly changing environment. Our score was a 4.8. the average score was a 4.4, and the high score was a 4.8. I support the school's move to remote learning as an interim measure. Again, we matched the high score as a weighted score of a 4.8 with an average score across schools of a 4.6. This was a really interesting question and showed the most diversity of answer. I think it had lots to do with the question itself, but definitely provides us a path towards what next steps might be in terms of reaching our parent community, reaching you, and perhaps some more parent education. I am comfortable with my understanding of how the remote learning program will affect my child. And so our weighted score was a 3.8, the average score was a 3.9, and the high score was a 4.2. In thinking about this question, I wonder if there's something to be said about the difference between elementary and high school students, that we know that the schools involved weren't all elementary schools, and perhaps children or families with older children have a better understanding. And I do wonder how it is we come to good understanding about how this will affect our children. I'm going to talk a little later in the Q&A about assessment and report cards, and that's one element of what we're talking about. But I think there's another element here that's about social emotional impacts of the remote learning and of this time in our lives. My child is adapting well so far to the remote learning environment. Our score was a 3.9, the average score was also a 3.9, and the high score was a 4.3. Again, I think there's something to be said here about elementary versus high school students, and this also gives us some feedback about areas that we may be able to put some more resources in, even in a digital environment, to help more of our students adapt. And I would wonder if we were to do this survey again 3 weeks from now, if we would see some change here as kids just become more and more familiar, as we implement more one-on-one work, as we implement more small group breakout rooms, and our faculty become more comfortable with the ways that they can engage kids collaboratively using the technology that we have available to us. And then the last question, I'm confident the school will continue to offer a fulfilling educational program for my child. The average score was a 4.2. Sorry, our weighted score was a 4.2. The average score was a 4.1, and the high score was a 4.4. And one of the things that we saw in some of the comments is this notion that it's hard to tell whether or not it will continue to be fulfilling with so many unknowns about what school is going to bring. You shared some really nice comments. I'm just going to put this slide up, and I'll read the first three. Penna DJDS responded very well and acted responsibly and quickly, so our children are still receiving their education and academic stimulation. Thank you so much for all the school has done. We're so impressed with the interim measure. An amazing job, kol hakavod, and hats off to you. Proud to be a Penna DJDS parent. And we've really felt the gratitude and the pride. In particular, your comments talk to the outstanding abilities of our faculty. And I know that there are some faculty who are on this call now who've chosen to be here with us tonight. And I think that our whole team has done such a heavy lift, and all of these comments are so well deserved. And the survey comments also gave us some constructive thoughts and some ways that we can consider moving forward. And so I think as we start to answer questions tonight, and as we continue to iterate what we're doing, there's ways that we can take these comments into account. And knowing that, for every parent and every comment that said there's too much screen time, there was another comment that said there's not enough time on Zoom, I want more time on Zoom. There's too much independent work, there's not enough independent work. And so part of the challenge is trying to get it right when there's people who have varying needs, wants, and desires around a totally new modality for school. And so I think it's important for people to see that the school has looked at all of the comments, and we're trying hard to iterate in a way that makes sense for the whole school, continue to slowly tweak the program, and also really keep doing what we feel and we've being affirmed that we're doing so well, and give our teachers the support that they need to really rise to the occasion and continue teaching in this environment for the time that it needs to happen. So that brings me to the end of the formal presentation. I think what we're going to do now is, Jay, are we ready to move into Q&A?
I'm ready. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I was unmuted. There's nothing worse than mute talking. Yes, we are. Thank you, Amy. And if there are questions, again, feel free to chat. The chats come directly to me. I wanted to, so the questions that have come in through the RSVP, through questions that have come in directly to Amy and the administration prior to this call, as well as just questions that people on the board have been asking. So we wanted to, I've sort of, in order to curate them, there are sort of three key themes that came up, and we'll go through these questions as such. Theme one was certainly 2020 operations. So between now and what would be the end of school at the end of June, that there was a series of questions related to that. Theme two were, is what are the inputs to decision making? So who are we talking to? What are the considerations? That's sort of current state. And then theme three, and I think this has been on a lot of people's minds, obviously, is the 2020-2021 school year and operations therein. So with those sort of themes that we have uncovered in these questions, I'll go through, Amy, if it's okay with you, and ask you the questions. Again, if there are follow-ups or questions that are not being answered, please feel free to chat. We're going to try to get to as many as we can as we go through. So I'll just jump in, if it's okay with you, Amy, and just start asking, and then we'll go from there.
Go for it.
How are you providing additional support for those that need it now and in the future as well, I guess? And I think it means students in particular.
So the way that we're really looking to provide additional support for our students is in many of the same ways that we had provided additional support for students when we were in school. We're looking at small group and one-on-one support as our primary ways to provide support. So some of the changes that have gone in the past 3 weeks have been the addition of one-on-one meetings for every student. In grade 1, 2, and 3, prior to March 13th, Pauline had been doing special reading groups with many of the students as part of the course of their day. And so when we came back from Passover, those reading groups resumed. And so we're seeing those extra reading groups happening, which has been great for many of our kids in the primary grades, and also great for the core teachers, giving them just a few fewer students who they need to focus on for reading instruction, and still being responsible ultimately for their reading assessment and the evaluation of their reading. In grades 4, 5, and 6, we've opened up a special resource classroom with Jeremy for an hour every afternoon, and increased his time in classrooms in the morning so that he's there for some of the core instruction and able to then follow up with that core instruction. And we find that some of our kids are going there, getting started during their independent time, knowing that Jeremy's there to answer their questions and able to get their work done. And for Hebrew, we put in, after Passover, a support schedule for our Hebrew teachers as a way to give our kids the support they needed and balance out teaching time. So for example, Avi, who has far less gym hours than he would have in school, is spending time in other classrooms offering small group Hebrew support and giving some extra support that way. We're also sending Francine into classrooms to lead some community circles. And my sense is that Francine is working overtime, meeting with individual kids and families and really helping to support them socially and emotionally during this time. And the same would be true of Pauline. Our teachers are really attuned to the social, emotional needs of the kids, and where needed are spending some time doing some of that really important work as well.
Thank you, Amy. Actually, this question came in and it relates to back to the survey. Do we have a sense of where our school fit in terms of overall response rate? I mean, it's, you know, it was
Yeah.
either 99 or 100 per question, which is
Yeah.
seems to be more than our general surveys we do, but go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. And I apologize for not sharing that. So what we found was that we had a 92% response rate in the 48 hours that the survey was up, which is a really great response rate. Kevin had told us that he was hoping for somewhere between 80 and 85. That was what he was seeing, which was a much higher response rate than he usually gets on independent school surveys. But the time that we're in is driving people to respond, and the fact that it was so short drove up response rate. So we were looking for anything above 80%, and we were really pleased to have a response rate of 92% of our families responding.
Yeah, great, thank you. This has come up in my house, what will report cards look like in June?
So Rena, Kate, and I have spent time thinking about what report cards will look like. It's a topic of conversation among the heads of schools that I talk to, the Jewish Day School heads, the case heads. And ultimately what we've decided is that we believe that given the nature of our report card as it is, we're able to issue a proper report card at the end of the year. Our reporting period goes from, I think it's January 28th, Cheryl can give me a more accurate date if I'm off, till June 18th or whatever the Friday is before June 24th. That's the reporting period. And we believe that given what we have from January 28th till March 13th, plus the work that our students have been able to show and submit online, the assessments that our teachers have been able to do in whole groups, small groups, and one-on-one, our teachers feel confident that they're able to report. And so we're moving forward with that. We've asked that in the anecdotal comments, all teachers comment on how children have transitioned and some of their strengths within a digital environment. The one area that we're not going to be reporting on is specialty subjects in kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2. So we feel that with the time that kids are spending in their specialties and the difficulty in really assessing in art, music, and gym in the younger grades, that we're not going to be assessing in those areas. And French will be assessed in grade 2 with one short anecdotal comment as part of the long narrative that the teachers write. Report cards will be sent out digitally on June 24th, sort of at noon, as they would have if we were in a school environment. And our internal reporting process and report card preparation process is following the same timeline and the same preparation that it would if we were in school. I've listened to other people justify why it is they're modifying their report cards for the end of this school year. And in consultation with our educational administrative team, we believe that we're able to assess accurately and fully enough to issue a proper report card. And we also are thinking ahead to next year and what is the implication of modifying a report card if we're going to find ourselves in sort of some rolling times of digital learning. That we really believe that we are teaching our kids, there is valuable learning for them to assess, and we want to make sure that we are showing up and presenting a really consistent approach to assessment, evaluation, and reporting.
Thank you. I can report that back to the family. The next two questions.
Sorry, there's one more thing. Thank you, Marina, for reminding me. We also have let our teachers know that marks cannot drop from where they would have been sort of first term or by March 13th because of the way kids are adjusting to the online environment. So there are students for whom adjusting to online has been really tough. And for those kids, we're working really carefully and hard to get assessments right. But we don't want this digital time and this digital environment to have a negative impact on reporting. And so we're thinking carefully about what that looks like and how we're going to do that. And following this is how high schools in Ontario have made the decisions about reporting, and we're following that lead and not allowing the digital environment to have a negative impact on kids' overall performance and assessment. And we're working really, really hard to give kids the tools they need to really meet the level and the potential that we know that they have and that we've seen that they've had in this educational grade this year with this staff, and working hard to really help kids stay at least where they were and report that way.
Thank you. I think the next two questions are related, or you're going to answer the second one with the first one, but you mentioned the Minister of Education, Lecce, earlier in your talk. We're expecting, I think, something from the province early line. If the minister sends kids back to school in June, what does that mean for us? Will we return to face-to-face school this year? I think that's a question a lot of folks have. I think that's both Amy and maybe Karen as well, but we'll start with Amy.
You know, what I believe, and this is just my uninformed, I have no intel, just, you know, I see the same news you do. What I think is very unlikely scenario that schools are sent back in June, we would comply with the guidelines as best we could, ensuring that the safety of kids came first and that we were able to provide the protection and the learning environment that our students needed in partnership with the MMJCC. And so Harriet and Roz and Julie at the JCC have been tremendous partners. We're in constant conversation with them about what kinds of things we're going to need when we do return to school, whenever that is. I think that a turnaround for June would be really, really tight. We don't know what it is that is going to be expected of us. We can anticipate, based on what we're seeing in other provinces, we can anticipate that we're going to be asked to have less kids in the class right now. We can anticipate that kids are going to be asked to be kept far apart. And we can anticipate that, you know, even if schools were to open, the number of kids that would actually return to the building would be minimal. And so when I talk to the very few colleagues I have who have had students return to their building, we've seen essential service workers return to children of essential service workers return to the building in kindergarten through grade 3 in Vancouver, at Vancouver Tomatora. And although as of today, again, everything's shifting, Montreal has now said kids in Montreal will not go back to school until September. When we believed they were going back next week or the week after or the week after that, and we were reading their preparation, what we knew was only 10 to 20% of kids were actually going to return to school. And so what we were seeing for those kids was a continuation of a digital learning environment that was delivered to them in a supervised school environment. And so I think that if we're to go back to school in June, it will really be in an incredibly, incredibly modified way, and probably with lots of digital learning still existing as we prepare for summer, which will give us the time to prepare for September and use the guidelines that are laid out for us. And my best thinking is that the guidelines that are being laid out for schools to open now, whether or not it is the very limited access to school in BC or PEI, or the access to school that we're seeing in Quebec, or in the States, some of the states are opening up, or European countries. I think 3 months from now, the way we are able to open school and the guidelines that are going to exist for us might be a little bit different. And so how we would open school in June and how we'll open school in September, I think will differ, although, you know, we'll have to rely on the guidelines.
That's helpful. Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions that have come in. And do we have any idea, I guess this is the other part, do we have any idea when we'll be able to make decisions? That's a slightly different question, but do we have any sort of foreseeability to the future of when we will know some of the unknowns right now?
Well, if I could answer that question, I think it's difficult to know what we don't know. We've spent a lot of time thinking through all the various scenarios We really are in the hands right now of the province and the Minister of Education, and very much looking forward to hearing how they envision the next several weeks to unfold. But I guess that's a way of answering the question by saying we don't know the answer right now because we don't know what the limitations will be on our ability to return. We have to, as Amy said, we have to take all of that into account. We've been working over the last 8 weeks, we've been talking to our partners at other Jewish day schools. We've been in contact with, people, representatives at the ministry. We've been in contact with the MNJCC. We've been in contact with case schools, and we are thinking through all of the scenarios. But we see, as Amy said, in other places, in other countries, in other cities where they're starting to resume school return, it's not going in the way that they envisioned when they started their plans. So I guess that's a long way of saying we don't have much certainty, but we are looking at a number of different options. And as soon as we have some guidelines from the government, we will be able to communicate some form of decision to the community.
Yeah. Amy, is there something else on that front?
What I would say about the timeline about decision making is that the pandemic task force, the JCC, the board of directors, the heads of schools at other Jewish day schools are in touch on such a regular basis and are so available and so there. And the chairs of the board of the Toronto Jewish Day Schools are in touch on a regular basis. So I think that when we have enough information to make decisions, there's going to be lots of people to support us in making those decisions. And I think we're going to be able to make those decisions without a very large lag time.
Can I just make one note? Because it was confusing to me, and I think confusing to a lot of people, certainly in March, is that our school and independent schools are not governed by the Education Act. We are governed, you're going to correct me wrong, by the Emergency Act, or the reoccurring Emergency Act.
Emergency order.
Emergency order. Yes. Thank you.
And so when, 2 weeks ago, when Lecce said public schools won't open until May 31st at the earliest, we actually weren't covered by that. It was only when the emergency order was extended to June 2nd that we were covered. And so Eric Rohr, CJA, CIS, which is an independent body for Ontario schools, are advocating very, very carefully and very strongly with the government to make sure that when they make these orders, that they remember that the independent schools need to be considered as part of sort of the legality of what's happening in the province.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Amy, on that front. This question came in. It may be, Amy and Karen could talk about it, but maybe first to Dan, who's the chair of the finance committee of the board. The question is, companies large and small, nonprofits large and small, everyone is feeling the hardship of this pandemic. Can you speak to the school's finances right now as best you can, Dan?
Hey, thank you everyone for joining tonight. It's certainly a very trying time for all of our families in our school community and all the families in our community and all of our communities. In the short answer is that the school is holding its own financially. It is on track to run a small deficit this school year, more than we had expected it to be, but the school is prepared for that. School management, particularly Amy and her team, did a very good job managing with, as we've talked about ad nauseum tonight already, the ever-changing environment that we find ourselves in. The bigger picture answer focuses on sustainability for the school. Essentially, we want to maintain the same high quality of programs and services that the school is providing during this entire situation. And as the situation is changing from a sprint to more of a marathon, the school has to be steered very carefully to make sure that it does not dip into its financial reserves, which it's worked very hard to attain and maintain, and that the school so far is doing a very good job of that. which makes myself, and I can speak for the rest of the Finance Committee, feel very good in terms of where we are given the circumstances. I also would just let everyone know that in terms of school supervision, aside from Amy and the professional team managing the school finances, the Finance Committee and the board are constantly monitoring what's happening within the school, and the risks or sustainability regarding this situation are already very present right now. And the answer to our problems that we are doing everything we can to avoid is not to have unlimited spending to help fill any holes. So we are doing as well, if not better, than to be expected for this current situation, trying our best to prepare for what the 2020-21 school year will look like under these or similar types of conditions.
Thank you, Dan and Karen and Amy as well. Here's one. Assuming we don't go back to school in June, are there plans to have Paul Penna Downtown Jewish Day School programs run through the summer, either digitally or in person?
So until today, I told people I was literally ignoring this question. So if you sent me emails about this and I haven't responded, it's because I had decided I was in denial that there wasn't going to be summer camp, and I was ignoring the question. So, you know, I think though, in the last few days, I know that we need to turn our attention to it, and the cries are getting louder. I think there's a few things we need to wait and see. I think, first of all, we need to wait and see what the guidelines are for summer camp, and we need to get a better understanding of what summer camps are going to look like this summer. In the very, very rare exception that anyone opens a residential summer camp, is that a possibility for any of our older students? And are kids going to be going to day camp? Because my preference in all scenarios would be that our kids spend their time outside playing cooperative social games and doing wonderful camp things. And the school isn't interested in getting into the summer camp space. And so what I think we are considering is, what would it look like to offer some academic type, very limited programming for more of our younger students. That's what seems to be of interest. And the school has been really successful with a plugged into preschool program for under 5, kids who aren't yet registered at the school. And so the opportunity exists to extend that out into a summer program without having a huge strain on resources. Our teachers don't work over the summer, and so we'd have to really think about what would be the structure to bring back a few teachers for online, you know, enriched digital learning in probably multi-grade class groupings, and thinking about whether or not there was demand for younger child programming or older child programming, and what that would entail from us. I heard from one of, on a call yesterday, an American school was doing sort of a camp in a box, where every week they send out a box of materials, and then there's some facilitated Zoom sessions to use those materials. So there's lots of possibility. It just all takes a lot of human resource. And the question is whether or not the school has the capacity over the summer to do that and do all of the work to prepare ourselves for September, which needs to be our primary goal. So, you know, when I think about the summer, I really think about the opportunity to use the summer to do the really hard work of preparing the physical school building and preparing the program for what we believe September is going to bring. And I worry that running summer programs would be a diversion from what we really, really need to be doing. And at the same time, we're starting to turn our attention to what that could look like, and whether or not we have the capacity, the human resources, and interested teachers who would want to do that. And so I can imagine that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, it would be something that we might survey our parents on to get a sense of interest before we really invested in developing some sort of a summer learning program.
Thank you, Amy. I think this question, which was sort of the question that came into theme 2, sort of what inputs to decision making are we considering or thinking about? I think that may have come up in a bunch of the other answers about the province, the JCC, UJA, Jewish day schools, heads of schools, Canadian Association of Independent Schools, all of those things. But I guess it lends itself to this question, which is, well, two multifaceted. One, will school return face-to-face this September? And I guess the other part of that is, what will school look like when it does return?
So, you know, my great hope, like all of yours, and my great expectation is that school will return face-to-face in September. And we're waiting for direction and guidelines from the minister. You know, the hope is that as the economy starts to open up, Ontario is able to manage the cases of the virus, they're able to manage the demand on the hospital, and we're able to move forward in our plans rather than move backwards. And that hopefully we're going to get to a place where the government feels like we can bring kids back to school. So I don't know if school will open in September, but I do believe that that's the intention of the government. And I do believe that we will want to, you know, be there and be in school face-to-face in September. So what will school look like in September? I'm going to share my screen with you again, because I just want to go through a few different terms that I think help you understand how we begin to design school. You know, these are all the educational lingo that has come up in the last few months, words that some of us knew before, some of us didn't. And so we've talked a lot in our digital environment about synchronous and asynchronous learning. Synchronous being learning that happens at the same time in the same way, and that's been our Zoom classroom experiences. And asynchronous learning, which is learning that might happen at different times and in different ways for different students, and that's the independent learning. Asynchronous learning before this moment of emergency digital education was really seen through what we called flipped classrooms. And our teachers in grade 4, 5, and 6 were dipping their toes into flipped learning. It's a style of learning that you see much more in middle and high school, whereby teachers record their lessons or they send out Khan Academy lessons. Kids are asked to do that lesson work before they come to school, and then in school they do their independent work with the teacher there to help them. So sort of a flipped model of lesson at home and homework in school instead of lesson in school and homework at home. And it's a way to increase engagement. So when we think about what school is going to look like, we're thinking about how do we balance synchronous and asynchronous, and that's really what we spend a lot of time thinking about right now, Rena and Kate and I. And when we think about going back to school, we think about this idea of face-to-face learning when children are actually in the classroom with their teacher, which is what we always have forever and a day believed school was to be. And then these models of hybrid or blended models of learning, or a high flex model of learning. And so a hybrid model of learning is an approach where there's elements of face-to-face learning in a traditional way, and flipped classrooms and other forms of blended asynchronous environments might be used. Whereas a high flex involves elements of both face-to-face and synchronous learning, as well as asynchronous learning. So when we think about September, we're really starting to think about how do we leverage all of those ideas? How do we create a system whereby our kids are getting the most from each day from learning and social interactions? And our best thinking right now is that it's likely going to be some sort of a blend of face-to-face learning, but really high flex learning, where if what we're told we have to do is have smaller groups of children in classrooms, and if we have to do what we've seen happening in other jurisdictions where kids come to school on alternate days, or they come to school for half days, or some model of smaller groups of learning, that's really ultimately governed by how long it takes to clean between groups of children and adults. We're thinking about how do we pair that with a high flex model where there might still be some digital learning, and that digital learning might be provided by specialists, and so that the amount of adults we're bringing into the building can be decreased, and we're really just bringing essential teachers into the building. That we might be doing some asynchronous learning. There might be lessons that are delivered in independent time. There might be digital study halls that are provided to kids when they're not actually physically in the school. But the great hope and my great wish is that by September, we are able to bring all of our kids back into school. But we're definitely thinking about the models that we might have to look at to allow kids to be in schools in the numbers that are being, I think it's stronger than recommended, that are being put upon us, that we have to follow those regulations, and ensuring that our kids continue to get a full learning experience that lasts throughout the course of their week. And at the same time, thinking about how we allow for social distancing. So the physical plant, we're working with UJA schools on sourcing decals for the floor, and working with the JCC on storing carpets and furniture and the things that we're going to need to do to make each classroom truly as big as it can be, so that we can allow kids to have as much personal space as they can have.
Amy, that brings up the next question, and in all my life experience, I didn't think this would be a question to have to ask, but how would the school or all the schools go about procuring PPE for whoever would be either need it by mandate or need it by good practice or need it because they feel they need it?
So there's different things that are happening. When it comes to procurement of PPE, UJA is working as a whole to try to get PPE for all of the schools. And one of the things that CJA is doing right now is advocating that the Jewish day schools be part of the ordering for provincial schools. And so the hope is that CJA will be successful in that advocacy work, and then ultimately will be part of a larger order if we need to. On a ground level, what we're thinking is that the school will either give or sell or through the PA, we're not quite sure exactly how that will happen, 2 cloth masks to every student if we have to have them wearing that, and if that is an acceptable form of face covering in schools, and that the kids will be asked to wear those masks, and that we will of course have a large supply of extra masks, disposable masks in the front office for kids who forget theirs. So similar to Keepas on Fridays, there will be face masks for those kids who forget their face masks, and we'll work on that. Gloves, things like that, we're hoping are going to come through large orders through the JCC, through UJA, and Julie at the JCC is really working on getting all of the safety things that are needed for the building. And so we're already starting to talk about where do we want hand sanitizer dispensers, where do we want plexiglass put up, how many thermometers do we need for the building. We're thinking about, this isn't PPE, but it is sort of entrances. Is there going to be a designated entrance for the school? Are we going to have a designated custodian for the school? And so all of the things that we need to do to ensure that we're keeping our physical plant safe so that our people stay safe.
Thank you, Amy. There's a series of questions that I will put under the category of family decisions, broadly defined. One is about registration for school next year and the impact, if any, to date. That's one thing. The other is presuming we go back to school in September, that's face-to-face, but people don't want to send their children back, but still want a Paul Penna education. Those questions, I think you get the gist of both of that.
So we're feeling good about registration for next year. Our registration remains stable, and we haven't seen the 20% decline that our American friends are telling us. And we're seeing across Toronto day schools a similar trend of stable enrollment, maybe down a little bit, but generally stable, and increased demands for subsidy. And so when we think about enrollment and the impact that COVID-19 might have on our families, what we are really, really hoping for is that our families have seen the value that the school brings to them educationally for their children and as a really safe and caring community for their family, and that staying part of our community is, continues to be important to them, that they see the value that we provide. And if it is financial reasons that are pushing people to consider leaving the school, that at that time they think about subsidy. We think that it's possible that our families who have received subsidy in the past might require more subsidy this year. And we believe that we will see an increase in families who require subsidy. And we've been working with our partners at UJA to streamline the subsidy process and create a subsidy process that is really focused on COVID-19 related financial emergencies, whereby the subsidy really is intended to be short-lived. It is a far easier application process because we know that financial documents really aren't available to show people's positions over the last 3 months. We can't rely on a 2019 T4 to really help with those subsidy applications. And then the other piece is that through Jewish Free Loans and through UJA, there has been a significant increase of dollars available to families to help them pay for Jewish day school tuition, and that the loan programs and the UJA subsidy programs, Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong, but those can be used in tandem. And so we're hoping, and right now our numbers are showing that our enrollment will stay stable, our need for subsidy will increase, and that ultimately we're going to be able to keep this community of people together and keep our school the size that it is.
Thank you, Amy. This question is sort of a combination of what we are now and what you described potentially for September as well. This describes it as sort of the rubber band effect, which is we go in and out of an in-school environment and this type of environment too. Is that sort of part of the overall planning, that it may be in and out, I guess, judging by sort of infections or outbreak in the community?
So when I talk to people in the educational community who are really following epidemiological trends and forecasting what the next 18 to 24 months could look like, that's what they're talking about. They're saying plan for the in and out. And I think that what we have now is a structure that we could transition in and out to. So when I think about what we need to allow us to easily move in and out, it's really about what are the things we need to put in place when we're in school so that systems and processes don't have to drastically change when we go out. And I think that thinking goes hand in hand with the educational thinking about social distancing. So what scares me about social distancing at school is that I've spent 15 years as an educational administrator working with teachers to increase collaboration of students, to increase small group work, to allow teachers to work in small groups and independently with students while other students have independent work to do. And what social distancing says is everybody works in their own space, on their own thing, and you can't work side by side or close to each other anymore, which seems to be counterintuitive to everything I've believed about education. And so I think what we're going to need to rely on is technological models and technological applications that allow our kids to continue to work in cooperation and in collaboration, even while they keep a social distance. So I think we're going to have to look carefully at what kind of one-to-one technology is available in the school. Up until now, what we have said is that our kids in grade 2 through 5 have laptops in their classroom in a 2-to-1, a 1-to-2 ratio, 1 laptop for every 2 students, really to facilitate small group and independent work happening side by side. And in grade 6, we move our kids to a 1-to-1 program to prepare them for moving on to middle school. I think we're going to have to rethink that and think about what is it going to take to get a laptop into every student's hand, both so that we can ensure collaborative work in the classroom, and also so that we know that all of our kids quickly have a device that they can take home and transition to digital learning with, if that's what's needed. So those are some of the things that we're thinking of. What kind of educational processes need to be in the classroom? How do we make sure that our Zoom environment is sustained without having a huge cost to the school so that it can easily be turned on and our school in the cloud can open quickly? And how do we keep a consistency of our faculty so that there isn't a lot of training that needs to happen, and that our faculty who have learned great strategies this year are able to quickly move and pivot back to digital. Where we are going to have gaps in faculty for next year, and where we are going to have to be hiring new teachers, or where we have started to work on hiring new teachers, we're going to be bringing those teachers into our digital environments in late May and early June to ask them to observe those environments and start to get familiar with what teaching looks like in digital environments from our excellent faculty. And so those are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that our students are ready and to make sure that our faculty is ready for the possible rubber band effect of an in and out and in and out. Jay,
Great.
I didn't answer the question about what if families aren't ready to send their kids back to school. And I think that there's an answer there that goes back to this idea of synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid, and high flex. And that, you know, if what we're talking about is 5 or 10% of our families, we're going to work on individualized programs to make sure those kids are getting the learning that they need. And if we're talking about 70% of our families, we're going to really have to evaluate how we balance face-to-face learning with synchronous, asynchronous, and hybrid and high flex learning. And so there's a piece of this that's really about how many of our families are going to be ready to send their kids back to school at different junctures.
Yeah, and I'm not, and if this is the case in the fall, there's going to be more people that have people in their families that are sick. And we need to, I guess, plan for that as well, as awful as that sounds, in a similar fashion. Thank you for that. I want to see other questions. There's been and I know this is part and parcel of the other questions you've answered about what school physically looks like. But what about the outdoor space at school? Will children, in the thinking that you've had or the conversations you've had, how are they thinking about outdoor space or outdoor spaces?
So, you know, there's two things I've heard. You know, one is every kid plays in their own 2-meter bubble. And then as we start to talk about this idea of expanding the bubble, the idea that kids can play with other, you know, a few other kids. And so we need to see what the guidelines around that looks like. And then we're going to have to think about what kind of rules and restrictions we put on kids around outdoor play. Our best thinking right now is that our recess schedules are going to be revised and that kids will go out up to the roof in their small groups. What's fantastic is that the Robert Street Field is really big, and with the construction there, it's really only getting bigger. I don't know if Nick or Marika are on the phone, but Nick gives me updates on the construction on the Robert Street Field. And last week on May 4th, with the first loosening of restrictions, construction to the Robert Street Field began again. And we have a short report on that and plugged in tomorrow with a picture of their work. I think someone may have snuck in with a camera and got a good shot for me. So the Robert Street Field, the work is going on. They're putting in the geothermal energy sources hundreds of feet below the ground. But ultimately, it's going to be a beautiful grass field, and it's going to provide us a lot of space to play. I think we're going to need to think carefully about how we mark the field and how we make sure that kids are playing within their bubbles. When we think about bringing kids back to school, if we have to bring them back to school in small groups, we think about bringing back families in the same time frame. And so just doing all of the different things that we can to reduce the number of families who are interacting with other families in a close contact sort of way. So again, I wait for the guidelines, and then once we have the guidelines, we'll be able to plan around that. But our rooftop space and the Robert Street Field are going to provide us with great outdoor space, and our intention is to continue with outdoor space. I would say the one place that I'm not sure that we'll move back to so quickly is our local park visits. I could imagine that being something that we take some time to return to, bringing our kids to public playgrounds. And that might be something, that might be a place like other places where we say, this is the guideline and we're going to be acting above the guideline with tighter and stricter restrictions.
Yeah. Amy, I'm cognizant of the time. It's 9:09 and we've gotten through, I think, nearly all of the questions that have come in both before and during through chat. There is one last question that did come in and I want to ask you because I think it is important. Like, how's the team faring? We don't often get a report on sort of the full team of teachers and administrators, but how are they finding it? What's the general vibe?
So first of all, whoever asked that question, thank you for asking about us. The vibe and the morale of the teachers is really, really great. We have as you know, we have a great faculty and a great administrative team. And what I have found to be most remarkable is the way that people are caring for each other. And so, our teachers have always had weekly meetings with administration. I think it's one of the things that makes the learning so good at Paul Penna is the amount of coaching and one-on-one meeting time that our teachers get. And that's continued. So we know that every teacher is getting a check-in from the school at least once a week, if not more. And we've been doing nice things together. 2 weeks ago, we delivered a Harvard Bakery challah to every faculty member or a Grzinski's challah, and it was a nice way to support a local business and also remind our teachers that we care for our faculty, our full faculty, that we care for them and that we're here for them. I'll say that one of my great delights is that, about once a week, we have some sort of a faculty social gathering and that the teachers are asking for those things to be repeated. On Tuesday of this week, we had a faculty Pilates class and we had nine faculty show up for that. Tomorrow morning, a bunch of us are gathering over Zoom to bake our challahs together before school starts, to bake our dough and let it start to rise. And so our team is doing great. Our teachers say that they feel supported and they feel supported by the families. I think that those small notes that parents send to the teachers to say that was a great lesson, or when you as parents take pictures of your kids learning or the product and send it along with essentially a happy face to say thanks for preparing this, it goes such a long way to boost our teachers' morale. And so I think that the combination of the full faculty being who they are and looking out for each other, and the way that the school parent community has really reached out to individual teachers to say thank you has helped to keep the morale high. And I would just ask that you keep doing that. When you think to yourself, wow, that was remarkable, like the way that this teacher or that teacher did something was really great. I'm so glad I got to be part of that. Reach out. I was in grade 1 on Tuesday and I got to watch the Lugba Omer bonfires being made, and every child had a parent beside them. And I know that Adina got great feedback on that, and it made a big difference. So for our teachers, they're being really boosted by the positive feedback that they're getting from our community. And I thank you for it. And I encourage you to keep doing it because it really helps keep our team feeling great. And the team is good. We're intact. We're good.
Well, Amy, I want to thank you and the team because this is not easy for anybody personally, professionally, family, school, kids. It's all topsy-turvy. So thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you to Karen and Dan on the board and the other board members that are on the call as well. I can't see everybody, so but thank you for that. We will continue to communicate what we know and our best and latest thinking when we know more. So look for that as well. As always, feel free to reach out, certainly to the board and Amy, with questions or concerns you may have. There's lots of time during the day and at computers that we can respond or get answers or provide comfort or access, any of those things. So thank you all for joining tonight. Look for future things like this. Next week on the 19th, Amy, is that right?
Yeah,
19
Joshua Tepper is back. We already have 95 people registered. So there's no limit, but register, invite your friends, your parents. They just have to RSVP. We have found that to be a really wonderful way for the school to provide an informative service well beyond our community. So that's been great. A reminder that tomorrow afternoon, our staff are engaging in PD. Teachers have been asked to give kids a very light, independent work assignment for the afternoon. And there is a music story time from 1:15 to 2 for kids in SK to grade 2 and their siblings. I think that you need to RSVP to that as well. I'll make sure an email goes out about that in the morning, just as a double, triple check. We've got Joshua Tepper coming next week. We've got some nice community events being created for Shavuot. And Rena and Janice are planning a whole school assembly. It will be our first full student event as a goodbye to Dana and Gaia, our Shinshiniot. It will be on Thursday, May 28th at 9 a.m. That date will be shared very soon, and all of our families are going to be invited to participate in that, to say goodbye to Dana and Gaia and wish them well as they venture into their next journey post Sheen experience.
Thank you, Amy. One last note: if anybody needs any sourdough starter, I have a very nice one that people gave me, so I'm happy to share that.
I want.
Okay, sure. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Amy, again. Thank you, Jeremy, for running the board op tonight. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week with Joshua Tepper next week. Thanks, everybody.
Samantha. Bye, everybody.